Atul, thank you so much for speaking with me, and many congratulations on this monumental show that has just opened at the Kiran Museum in New Delhi. You know, the first thing that struck me was the fact that I could not associate you with this work, because in the past what I've seen of yours is very monumental, large scale work. You have really enjoyed surfaces like the shutter, which is iconic work of yours. Even canvases, have been pretty sort of large scale and monumental.
Yes.
So just that, as a starting point, these are rather small scale works, right? I mean, one understands the genesis was the start of COVID, but just talk about this journey of getting into a smaller sort of a space.
Yeah, I mean, one was the obvious reason that because the lockdown from 24th March onwards was be announced all over the country, and I realized that I won't be able to go to studio. Oil painting, requires a different kind of setup, and that was not possible. I said I'll just take few watercolor papers or pads which I had in the studio, and a few tubes and small, some brushes, and I set up a studio in a small guest room which I have at home. So and I said I have to work. Basically I didn't want to sort of just sit quietly or read or watch movie at home, but painting has to happen all the time. That is my inner need. Without that I cannot survive.
Sure.
So I started doing small scale works on paper. Precisely on 22nd of March I did my first small painting, and then the show opened coincidentally on the 22nd March after 2 years.
After 2 years, absolutely.
Yeah. And finally, in a course of time, in 1 year's time, I produced some 366 works. Out of that, 135 works are on display here. So it so happened that there was no agenda, there was no program in the sense showing, traveling, or in terms of subject matter, or in terms of concept or idea, which normally takes your time in a different way.
Right.
And one would kind of organize those things. So here it was just a small paper, very humble medium like watercolor,
right,
and pencil. I would just do some drawing, and being a figurative painter, since I am not an abstract artist, the human figure would come, and I did one figure, and what else in the background. It so happened that it was landscape, and gradually this happened, and I allowed. And one thing, within 1 week's time, I realized that I don't want to I'm not going. This is just for myself. They are not going to be shown anywhere. This is I'm just doing and enjoying. The medium, the way the solitary figure was emerging.
Right.
Sometime in a kind of a wilderness, mountain and seascape, and gradually all these things started coming. And also I realized that it was playful, because the medium also suggests. You see, in oil painting, once you put a patch, it remains there, like the way it is. But in watercolor, if you put a patch, water doesn't obey. It moves the way it wants to move, the way it wants to dry.
Yes,
If there is more water in somewhere else, it again takes another flow. So, so this medium suggested a lot of things.
So was watercolor a new sort of a medium as a medium itself for you to work with?
I have been doing watercolors for a long time actually, large scale watercolor. My first Gandhi series was in watercolor, and large scale watercolors. So, and then I have been doing small watercolors, medium sized watercolor. But this is considering the kind of
the situation.
Yeah, I had to kind of confine to the small.
Specifically about the subject matter, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, like you just said yourself, I mean, the figure is definitely back into the frame, and it seems often in a natural environment. So my question to you is, I mean, what was the inspiration for you to get those landscapes in your frame. I mean, you were confined at one level.
I have been observing these trees and plants while morning walk. I'm doing nothing and not listening to music or anything, and it's just a half an hour's walk and some 30 minutes stretching, which I do there with a tree. And I notice few specific trees, how they're changing during the season. Just the first rain makes them drenched, and the normal brown becomes almost black, the tree trunk, and so because there is a lot of greenery there, so the tree and plants and vegetation was there somewhere in my head, somewhere, which I was experiencing during the walk. So probably the nature came from there, but at the same time something unusual I noticed, that because it was a complete lockdown, there were no cars, and the birds, which normally in a city like Bombay you don't hear chirping of birds, but we could hear them, the sound of birds and the trees. If you notice, I mean, no doubt they are interesting, engaging, playful, but still the palette remains some sort of a grey brown.
And another important observation there, your figures are almost, none of the paintings have the expressions.
Yes.
They're faceless, sort of nameless people. And often even the gender is not sort of revealing. Is it a man or a woman, right? So is that, what is that referencing?
No, that was basically when I kind of take a figure, it's a very formal device, I would say, that I would follow. And then when I feel that, okay, there is a need to show, say breast or a certain kind of a hair for women, which is required as a visually, particularly when the migrants started going away, leaving cities. At that time, apart from the men, there were many women. Particularly, where I live, there were a lot of new buildings were coming up. So this grey, exactly, construction labor, and they were, and there were many women, and hard-working people, and walking all the way to their native place or somewhere. In between, people are dying, and so I think that definitely has a certain age. Then it started emerging, and within a month's time, after producing 30 paintings, I realized what mode or what expression is coming throughout. And I also felt that, is it repetition? But I said, this is not for anyone. I am not going to show this to anyone. There is no pressure. And
so you thought.
So there was a complete relaxed, but 3 to 4 hours of intense work on each individual work. That happened. To begin with, it was like a male figure, which I had in my mind. And when I did the drawing, I retained certain lightness, between the neck and the torso, where I felt that, there has to be something. And at which moment I thought about these figures in this way. That's a complete mystery to me, as far as the subject matter is concerned. So when I put the snake around, because the snake also has there in some of the works previously. As soon as the snake is around the neck, it looked like a Shiva. So then I thought of adding the Ganga, the Ganges coming out from his head. And when it came in, the hand was the way it was kept. I drew a bowl, and I gave a brush in his hand, and there is a Shiva Linga, as if he's supposed to going to paint this lingam. So that is one thing. And when I did this specific painting, it's a tree trunk with 7 holes in it, and when I happened that there's man and woman with a kind of a solid rugged tree, and there are very specific circular hole, and I thought of a flute. You see, and I was reminded of one beautiful small watercolor which I had seen in Indian Masters exhibition, which happened sometime in 2011 in Zurich at the Rittberg Museum, which B.N. Goswami and Everhard Fischer has curated. This small early Indian miniature painting has a normal landscape, but then there was a small bird, and on the beak of the bird there were 7 holes, and the work was called Origin of Music. So I think this is the music, and I was listening to a lot of old Hindi film songs at that time.
Okay, step back again. Your past has been reaction to the outwardly world.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
Popular culture, you said, Bollywood, humor, fun, what's happening around you.
Yeah.
This feels a combination of the outwardly influences, but somewhere there is an inward sort of a journey too. What's your react to that as a statement?
You are absolutely right. Probably the first time these works of mine, which is no reference to art history, no politics or social concern, which there are some works, but the inner world or my deep down inside what I am feeling, and I'm a believer. So the divinity and the way it walks through us. So and I flow with that like a log of wood in a river, and it has no role to play. It will just float
where the river takes,
whatever current
right.
goes. So these works were happening, I was almost like that log, and wherever they take me, and I would not judge them, and I would, as I said, I would not even show it to anyone, because I didn't want any response from anyone, and even a glance is sufficient to distract you. The darkness, within,
is something that
and the life, the
there is a nest, there is eggs,
and the egg,
so it's like there is death and there is life and sort of solid, void, light and dark. It's all sort of coming together. Roobina, thank you so much for joining the conversation. My first question to you really is, so what was your reaction when you saw this sort of 373 odd works, 366 odd works that got created?
I was amazed and loved the tentativeness of the work, that there were tentative mark makings, there were, monumental but amorphous forms, and there was this solitary figure. And each one was moving me in a different way, the work. And coming to know from him that this was something that he did in actually a lockdown time. He was thinking about art and he was wanting to do something just to create a language which expresses the inexpressible, because we all have been through the pandemic, and I today stand here and just thank, what we are celebrating in this exhibition is perhaps the fact that we are still alive.
Question that I asked Atul also, and I want you to respond. Although a lot of the influence and motivation is what he's seeing around or remembering of, the trees and landscapes and mountains, etc. The longing to go and visit the mountains, etc. maybe. But a lot of it feels very inward, an inward journey oriented also, right?
Yes.
So how did you sort of react to that, number one? Number two, do you think this is a celebratory work, or do you think there is remorse and sadness in the works overall?
I think we all have gone through emotions of different kinds, and I don't think that the work has one mood. So like he says himself that, there were days when I would be just, staining the paper, moving my brush as and when, whatever came to my mind, and not necessarily the idea of, as I wrote in my note also, that it goes beyond the idea of intention and perfection and all those, or that there is what is there is only an inner compulsion. Those are all the external factors are not there. And he rightfully said when I met him that I never thought that this would become an exhibition, or this could become because there are so many works.
In fact, Atul said that he was not even intending to ever show it to anyone.
Yeah, he when he started, he was just and rightfully, because also for a curator, when it's a huge corpus of work. Okay, you have 365 works in front of you. You are looking at one, but also seeing the other. You don't know how this can turn into an exhibition. And I remember the first option that I gave to curatorial option that I was working out in my head instantly was, Atul, why don't we do 2 chapters? maybe an edit makes, when you curatorially edit something, maybe that edit makes it also more, makes the narrative
stronger.
In a way, it punches the narrative in some
So
way.
you're actually entering my concluding question that I had for you, like 366 works to 130 that are not just
135.
And you started to sort of answer that, but how did you choose the works, one, and two, how did you choose the flow?
So the isolation was still on. I mean, we were not traveling. I could not go to a studio a couple of more times that I wanted to. So we were also over the phone, and that was the way this conversation went on. I sending him some images and saying that this is something very interesting. He sending me something. Titles were discussed. This exhibition is all about intuitive ways of working. I think he worked in an instinctive way. Yeah. I curated in a very intuitive way, and still I must say that this is perhaps my exhibition that I've curated with the least of changes and mistakes. Least.
You call them mistakes?
Yeah, because I would because at times there are works I sometimes at the last moment say, no, this should have been this should have been there. But in this case, I don't know how, but it has just flown, it has just flown in its way that I was thinking of the narrative, or when I write these working notes, as you can see, yes. So like the working notes, it's completely the same thing in my head, that when I'm putting the works, I was only thinking of one thing, and that was Atul went for a walk every day. Audiences need to go for a walk here.
And that's the title.
So I don't want to create rooms, and I don't want to create isolated rooms.
It's in a flow, you meander.
Yes, so I want it to be a space of meandering. I want people to just move wherever they want. When they stand here, they look there. When they stand there, they look there.
And there is not a forced start and an end.
No, so those vantage points for me
are important.
Like, why would I put a corner like this? It's exactly like this, that for me that continuity comes out in different ways.
Correct.
Even it goes beyond this fixed white space. I have a work outside it that is leading you into it, So things like that. And I was curatorially just thinking this walk, this meandering. And I was thinking when people move, they should also pause. So these walls are all moments of pause with one single work.
Which probably you would do when you're walking too. Pause on a flower.
So you do pause, So you will at some point need that extra reflective moment of engagement. And that is what I was thinking when I was
change of direction.
When I was creating this layout.
Kiran space has been redesigned.
Completely.
Yes.
Completely. So if you are given just empty space,
that much more you can do to
it's a huge challenge.
Huge challenge.
How to kind of
there was nothing
divisions, what kind of a division, whether there should be room, as she said it, or just floating walls, partition. It is quite, and the way what was brilliant for me when I entered for the first time, the grouping which is done, with in a individual wall or in a long wall, it all it has their own narrative
and energy and
specific energy, with
a few metal sort of pieces.
It is not in that sense a linear way, there could be a boatman and the fishers, but there would be something else would come. Like here, the kind of arm, of a female figure is going, and here look at this. So there is a
or even the landscape. I was thinking is going that way. If you have 135 works and you have a particular frame and you want to still work with, repetition is what? Repetition, I love this term actually, I would say, because you draw is an act of repetition. You keep drawing, you paint, even that is. You compose something, could be your habit, So repetition is part of it, but repetition within repetition to find invention and creation. This is where the work then starts speaking to you, that it could be certain motives that may appear, it could be, but everything changes from the scale of the landscape, to that moving boat which is going towards the unknown, we don't know where it is. Everything changes.
In every
so
frame,
you
in every
may
frame.
have the boat in
Right.
so many of these instances, and you may have certain, the solitary figure there
But the
performing so
narrative
many
is-
acts.
The narrative itself changes.
The
in
narrative
very, very
and the way that the
Yeah.
artist creates space within that.
within the frame.
And how that rhythm continues and spills from one work to another.
Right.
That has to, if you are attentive and if you are sensitive to that, maybe then you are able to,
Produce that.
then the narrative actually becomes very beautiful.
So I think the whole act of curating for you also at a time which was so confined,
Yes.
changed the way and probably influenced the way this thing sort of came about. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you, Roobina, for
Thank you.
sharing this little sort of journey with Atul and bringing this show together. And Atul, what a brilliant show. Congratulations.